Coming up in this week's episode of TechSNAP, the most common type of VPN has been cracked wide open, and we've got the details. Plus, what you should look at before you rent a server, and what's involved in managing your own dedicated box. Plus, a big batch of audience questions and our answers, and a heck of a lot more. All that in this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi, everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. This is episode 69, and we recorded live on August 2nd, 2012. This episode is brought to you by GoDaddy.com, and I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on. And the live stream is powered by the incredible ScaleEngine.com. You might hear a little more about that as the show goes on as well. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for watching.
So close to episode 70, Alan. I can smell it. I can smell it. We got a really good show.
What does it smell like?
It kind of smells old. Kind of like maybe somebody's closet that hasn't been opened up for a couple of years. But maybe we can dust it out and air it out before next week to kind of fix that. That way, stink things up. So we've got a really good show. And in the feedback segment, we're going to get to a question that we held last week. And what was the gist of that question, Alan? It was like whether or not you should self-host versus shared hosting or something like that.
Well, it was more just what was involved in running your own server. And
because that's right.
We had kind of made the point last week that if you are not up to it, you shouldn't do it and should just have hosting where someone does it for you.
So now maybe we'll define what up to it means? Is that kind of what you think? Because we might define what up to it means?
Talked about some of the things you would need to be able to do if you wanted to run your own server.
Now, before we go on, we have a new show on the network that I don't think I've talked about much on TechSNAP called Coder Radio, which people are loving. It's all about the art and the business side of software development, all of the related technologies around that. Well, I wanted to give a special shout out. We don't have any affiliation. I'm just really excited for him. But Michael Dominic, the host of Coder Radio, has released his own app for the Mac, and it is a GitHub client, and it's a really slick GitHub client that can create these really nice public snapshots of GIFs from GitHub, which are the little like diff snapshots. You can edit Gits, and of course you can also communicate with people on GitHub, and it does sharing. And by the way, $2.99. Now I know not a lot of people out there are Mac users that watch this particular show because you guys are all hardcore.
A lot of developers are, especially open source developers. It turns out.
And this is a really slick app, and just it's a nice way to say thank you to Michael too for making a great show. You can find that over at codejournalapp.com, and it is he really focused on integration with the Mac. Like it integrates with that new notification center that Mountain Lion has. And now he's kind of turning his sights on the Linux desktop and kind of researching what it would take to make a really integrated Linux app. So check that out in the future too. But anyways, congratulations to him. It's cool to have someone on the network release a piece of software. And he's given a go at trying to avoid the whole App Store thing. He's trying to sell it directly from his website, specifically
there you go.
because of sandboxing issues that kind of impact the functionality of the app. So. All right, Alan. Well, that's cool, and congratulations to Michael for doing that. Should we go to our first news story this week?
Yes, because it's also about releasing a piece of software.
All right, set it up for me. What are we talking about?
Yes, so Moxie Merlinspike, who's a well-known security researcher, was at DEF CON, and he gave a talk and released a tool to go with it that allows you to analyze and crack MS-CHAP encrypted VPN and Wi-Fi sessions.
So, so when you say MS VPN sessions, you mean like Pptp type VPNs?
Yeah. So basically, with your Pptp Vpn, which is a point-to-point tunneling protocol, which is basically a way to encapsulate PPP over an existing TCP/IP connection. So basically, a way to do a VPN over the internet. A lot of people use this to call in to work to access the LAN there or whatever.
Yeah, it's nice because it's integrated right into Windows. There's a client for it. It's integrated into Windows Server, and it ties in with Active Directory. So
but there's also Linux servers for it. It's supported by things like pfSense.
Some Linksys routers have support for it. Some of them.
Yeah. And so one of the ways to authenticate a session over PPTP is the MS-CHAP, or Microsoft Challenge Handshake Authentication Protocol.
Okay.
And it's responsible for passing the user's password to the other side, but not in plain text, and defining the encryption that will be used for the whole session, which is actually based on that password.
Oh, okay.
So this new tool allows cracking encrypted VPN sessions. You would do that, and also Wi-Fi sessions where the password for the Wi-Fi session or the encryption is set up with the same MS-CHAP mechanism. And basically would allow the attacker to decrypt the entire VPN session, so all the traffic that was going back and forth across the VPN, and as well as that, find the credentials for the VPN. So that would then allow someone to log in as you to the VPN.
Oh, really?
On top of being able to see everything that goes back and forth across the VPN.
And you got to figure in a lot of cases, the way a lot of smaller networks are at least set up is when you get in the VPN, you're essentially on the LAN in some cases.
Yes, and you're treated as a trusted user, basically.
Yeah. Almost like another workstation, just
basically you bypass the firewall and get into the network.
Right, exactly.
That's almost the point of a VPN.
The best version of island hopping or bypassing around a firewall is it's just that right there.
Yeah. So the MS-CHAP v2 protocol was introduced in 1998 as part of Windows NT 4 Service Pack 4, and was also released as a downloadable update for Windows 95 and Windows 98.
This is okay. So you're talking. It's not the newest kid on the block.
No. And due to the way that the MS-CHAP protocol works, and it uses the NT hashing algorithm and DES encryption, it's a lot less secure than it was ever designed to be. Although some of that is just the fact that it's so old, and back then DES was considered okay, and now it's not. But also, a bunch of trade-offs that were made that make it a lot less secure than they thought it was.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So if you take an example of a really secure VPN service like riseup.net, basically when you sign up there, they generate a really long password for you, 21 characters out of a 96 character key space. So it's a very random, very long password.
Yeah.
And so that gives you a key space of approximately 138 bits.
Riseup.net?
Yeah. But it's just an example from the Merlin Spike's blog as one of the services that forces really long, strong passwords. However, because it uses the MD4, not MD5, but MD4 hashing algorithm to hash the password, it actually ends up restricting the password to only 128 bits anyway. Because of hashing collisions. And then basically it divides that MD4 hash up because DES has the keys for DES are only 7 bytes long. So it ends up basically using 3 separate DES keys. But each of those keys is 7 bytes, so that ends up with 21 bytes. But your output from MD4 is only 16 bytes, right? 128 bits is 16 bytes. So what it does is it leaves the last 5 bytes as just 0. Yeah.
Okay.
So if you start at the beginning, if DES with a 7-byte key, right there, you're reducing the key space from 128 bits of the MD5 or MD4 there to 56 bits plus 56 bits plus 56 bits, which actually works out to only 57.59 bits. Right?
Okay.
Right.
I'm partially following you. Why does it only work out?
Well, because because basically it's 2 to the power of 56, right? That's 56 bits. So 2 to the power of 56 plus 2 to the power of 56 is actually just 2 to the power of 57.
Right. Okay.
Because it doubles each time. So instead of doubling, it only goes up by another half.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Right. So basically 3 7-bit keys or 3 56-bit keys separately only gives you 57.6 bits of key space. So basically by taking that 128 and dividing up into 3 chunks, you've basically cut it down to 3 chunks of 56. But because of the fact that the last 5 bytes of the third block are just zeros, that means you only really need to figure out the first 2 bytes of that block. So your key space is now 2 to the power of 56 plus 2 to the power of 56 plus 2 to the power of 16, which is only 65,536. I did that in my head.
Wow, nice. Well done.
No, I just have them memorized from 0 to 16. Anyway. But also because the 3 DES blocks are done separately, you can actually crack them concurrently.
I was wondering.
This is the same thing that you can do with the LM hash passwords, where they broke it into the 2 7 characters and hashed them separately. Is basically you can crack all 3 chunks at the same time. So you try every possible key once, and then for each attempt, you just compare that to all 3 ciphertexts.
Right. I was biting my tongue. I thought you might get to that. I was almost going to.
And basically, you reduce the entire key space down to just a single DES key of 56 bits.
That's horrible.
And basically, once you crack that, then you're good to go.
That's not too difficult.
So the tool that Moxie, Merlin, and Spike released called ChapCrack will basically analyze a packet capture of a VPN or Wi-Fi handshake, the setup part of it, and it basically generates this token, which includes the DES ciphertext and the MD4 hash and all the bits that are needed to crack this. And then you take that token and you go to cloudcrack.com, which is a service run by Merlin and Spike, and you pay a small amount of money, and they run it against their hacking machine or cracking machine. So they have
hacking in the cloud for you, cracking in the cloud.
Yeah, well, they have a DS encryption system. It's based on a Pico Computing FPGA. So basically, they have this system where it's 40 cores of 450 megahertz each that can crack 18 billion possible keys per second.
Oof, duh.
And then their system is 48 of those put together into a single computer, basically. That's 48 times 40 cores. So with that machine, in a worst case scenario, basically having to crack, the very last, if you did all the keys in the order, the very last one.
Yeah.
So basically, it would take them a maximum of 23 hours to crack any DES key, which means that half of all possible keys would be cracked in less than 12 hours. To compare, the EFF's Deep Crack machine, which was built in 1998 at the cost of $250,000, took an average of 4.5 days to crack a single key. And this machine can do that in 12 hours instead.
Now, this is just the Microsoft implementation?
Oh, no, actually...
That they could crack like this?
They're cracking DES, which is the old encryption mechanism that's been replaced with AES.
Right, okay. I just thought they were still talking about their encrypting, getting the MS
Chap is just using DES. And so they crack DES, and it gives them the whole thing. Basically, Microsoft thought that they were adding enough other stuff to keep it random, but basically, there's if you crack this one thing, then you get everything.
Yeah, they wrapped their hot dog with bacon, and they got the bacon off, and now there's hot dog there to eat.
Yeah, it's more like the bacon's in the middle, and you wrapped it in something like broccoli that people didn't want.
I like.
And then
don't
people
like that. But I know what you're saying.
Peeled that away and got at the bacon.
Right. Maybe like it's just there's like regular bacon on the outside, and then there's like honey smoked bacon on the inside.
Something like that.
All right. Anything else on that one?
So basically, Merlin Spike recommends that all users and VPN providers immediately stop using Pptp.
Wow. Okay.
And basically consider all traffic that's sent over the internet via Pptp to be unencrypted and unprotected. So if you're still going to use it, realize that anybody can crack it and see what you're sending back and forth, including the password you use to log into that VPN service.
That's pretty fundamental because Pptp is a pretty wide, is maybe the most.
It's very widely used, first of all, because the client is built into Windows.
Yeah. So
not making people install something like the Cisco VPN client was very advantageous. Secondly, on the server side, it's a lot easier to set up. Things like IPSEC with certificates means you have to have a certificate authority, and you have to, make the clients trust the certificate authority, and it's all this work.
Right.
Whereas Pptp just works.
And it integrates well with Active Directory, like I was mentioning, so you can do group control. So you just say, oh, yeah, you want to be in the VPN group? Here you go, and it's done. And then the fact that so many routers out there have it.
A lot of routers now. It's built into pfSense. It's very popular. But basically, it shouldn't be trusted for authentication.
There you go.
Also, enterprise networks that use WPA2 with the MS Chap v2 for their radius to basically authenticate users back to Active Directory or some corporate single sign-on system.
Right.
Should immediately switch to using something else. Although they should also avoid IPsec with pre-shared keys, because those pre-shared keys are subject to regular dictionary attacks. Right? You captures some traffic, you take it offline, and you can sit there and crack at it until you figure out what their pre-shared key for IPsec is.
Right.
So Merlinspike recommends using a VPN based on some type of certificate system, such as OpenVPN in certificate mode or IPsec in certificate mode.
There you go.
I personally use OpenVPN in certificate mode.
Yeah. Okay. There's
Mostly set up.
The Alan Jude stamp of approval right there. All right. Well, should we move on to the next story?
We have some links here. There's the GitHub repository for Chapcrack.
Yeah.
Threatpost has some coverage of the news. The main link for the article goes to the Merlinspike page where it has a bunch of interesting diagrams. I think you were showing them.
Very good stuff. I was showing some, but if you're listening to the audio version, go check out those diagrams. It explains everything I was talking about.
How it works, how the cracking works. It's very good there.
Yeah.
Also, I have links to some previous analysis and attacks against the Microsoft Pptp authentication extensions.
Oh, man.
Including one by Bruce Schneier that basically goes into other problems with the protocol.
Wow. Okay. There you go. I mean, Pptp has to be, it's done then. It's just done. I guess we have to retire.
It's still going to be used for a long time by a lot of people. And so it's going to become a very popular target for this cracking.
Exactly.
Although, to attack it, you still have to be somewhere where you can observe the traffic.
Yeah, like a Wi-Fi network.
Right. So it would be very popular on Wi-Fi networks.
I mean, people use these kind of things over Wi-Fi thinking they're safe.
Yeah. So you're like, oh, I'm on public Wi-Fi, so I'm going to use a VPN to make sure that people can't snoop on my traffic.
Right.
But if you use this one where somebody can capture your entire...
The one built
VPN
into Windows.
Session. Right. If you capture someone's entire VPN session, then you extract the capture of the negotiation establishing the connection, run it through Chapcrack, get the token, send it off to cloudcrack.com.
Yeah.
Pay, I think it's $17.
You don't even have to sit there and do it. I mean,
you run the result code that CloudCrack gives you through the tool again, and it basically decrypts the entire packet capture for you. You load it up in Wireshark again, and you can see everything that went back and forth across the VPN, as if you were running it on the computer that was talking back and forth.
It's craziness. Craziness, Alan. All right. So you guys out there, check your VPNs before you wreck your VPNs. Alan, let's talk about this story where when you put users in charge of something very important that involves using technology and they're technology illiterate, I don't think you should be too surprised when you get results like this, but it's still pretty discouraging. What happened?
So Elections Ontario confessed that they lost a couple of USB sticks with some voter information on them, and that part of the reason they weren't encrypted is because the staff thought they had encrypted the files by putting them in a .zip.
So they confused compressing them all together. They confused that with encrypting it.
Partly, yes.
Did they at least password protect the zip file?
I don't think so, but also zip files have been notoriously weak at that. Although it depends which zip program you use and how.
But it would almost be like 10% more understandable. Well, I password protected it. I thought that was encryption. Yeah. Wow.
So basically, part of the problem stemmed from the fact that because the election resulted in a minority government where no party had enough seats to actually make a government, it means that they had to work with the other parties, and at some point there could be a vote of no confidence and we would have to have another election, possibly only months after the first one. So Elections Ontario had to be prepared for that. And so basically they rented out an extra warehouse and set up some offices and basically broke up the processing of the election that just ended and getting set up for the next one. As part of that, because it was a temporary location, it didn't have access to their server where they store all this information. So they were shuttling it back and forth between the main location and the satellite location on USB thumb drives. The first problem was that these USB thumb drives weren't being locked up in a drawer or anything overnight. They were just being left laying around on desks. Not a good plan.
You're making my eye twitch, Alan. You're making my eye twitch.
And another problem was that, apparently from this news article, they're saying that the staff members using the USB sticks didn't really understand what encryption was or how it works, because, people that I'm guessing were like secretaries or whatever don't really understand this stuff. And apparently, according to the news article from the Ottawa Citizen newspaper, somebody decided, well, we'll just Google it and figure out how to do it. because that's how you should always learn how to encrypt your file.
Well, to me, this seems like this is the first point of failure. Is there shouldn't have been any part of the process left up to the end user.
Right.
That was the first fail right there. Is it should have been completely managed for them, and they should have just been following a process.
Yes. But anyway, apparently, I don't know what they could have Googled for to come up with the result. But anyway,
I just love it's like a blanket excuse, though. I Googled it.
Yeah. Yeah, and Google told me the wrong thing. It's like, yeah, but I'm sure if you Google for how to encrypt the files on my USB stick, one of the first 10 results is going to be TrueCrypt.
Yeah, and probably not WinZip. Probably.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then, so the data that was on the USB sticks basically included the full name, gender, date of birth, address, and any information you updated with Elections Ontario during the election.
It's like marital status or what? Like,
I don't know exactly. Not that much information.
We're talking 2.4 million people, right?
Well, that's the other thing we'll get to in a second.
Okay.
Also, it may or may not include whether or not you voted in the previous election. But part of the problem was they don't know which files were on which USB sticks, apparently.
Yeah.
So they're not entirely sure which data got leaked. So it could be any of about 4 million people's data that got leaked.
4 million?
Well, some of the data didn't get lost. They still have the USB sticks. So it's about 2.4 million, but they're not entirely sure which people's data was lost and which people's weren't.
Well, that's great.
Yeah. Because basically each writing was a separate file, and the files were, I'm guessing, just randomly scattered across different USB sticks.
Well, first of all, it sounds like they had... they're not doing a very good job of storing election results or whatever. Obviously, they're storing all these things.
Normally, they have a server in their office, and it's all done with a network or whatever. But because they were working out of a temporary location, they were just copying files onto a USB stick and running off with them.
If only there was some sort of cloud election service that could have kept all of their results in the cloud.
Or if they just used a VPN.
Just not Pptp. Yeah. Wow. That is ridiculous. Yeah, they could have just had a little mini server there at the branch location with an internet connection and a VPN back to the main office.
Yep. Or one of 100 other solutions.
Wow. Yeah, no kidding, right?
Yeah. And the funniest part of this is that after the data breach, they got some new USB sticks to replace the ones that were lost.
Good.
And they're like, well, we should buy ones that have encryption built into them. Right? So they bought some USB sticks that could do encryption.
At a premium price, I'm sure.
Yeah. But because nobody knew it, they never configured or actually used the encryption on the new USB sticks.
What the hell? This is a total failure on, is there no overarching IT organization that's mandating the technology that these people use and how they should use it?
I'm not sure.
This is the biggest case for not letting users run IT right here.
Yeah. But my question is, were the staff under the impression that because the USB stick said encrypted on it, that it just magically encrypted stuff? That, you plug it in, you store the files on it, oh, they're encrypted now.
Right, there's no critical thought.
If I plug it into a different computer, I can access the files.
Yeah.
But
they never stop and go, I wouldn't want it to function like that, because they could just plug it into their computer. I mean, this is such a fail whale, it's not even funny.
Yeah, so I've never took much stock in any USB stick that claims it does encryption. It's like, if I want to encrypt stuff, I'll do it myself and then put it on top of the USB stick. I just want the USB stick to be a dumb USB stick that does what I tell it to do.
Yeah. Yeah. The only reason you might do it, to be honest, is if you want to throw somebody off your trail, right? So that way the feds get you out and they think they got your real encrypted thumb drive and they get you decrypted and all you got and there's a few documents. But on there you got a hidden TrueCrypt volume. And that's really where you got the goods.
Sure. Interesting thing is that this story, without the part about the fact that they thought zipping it was encrypting it, was almost made it into a previous TechSNAP when I found out about it.
Oh, really?
So I have a link here from the original report from a couple of weeks ago, where the elections officer was giving his report to the government about the data breach.
Oh, okay.
And basically in that report, the consulting company that came in and audited what had happened or whatever just mentioned that the USB sticks were not encrypted. They didn't mention that they thought that they were encrypting them, but they really weren't. It just says that the files were not encrypted.
Maybe to save embarrassment, or maybe just because they didn't feel it was their place. But that would have been a nice clarification to make a while ago, so that way people kind of had a heads up before one of them got lost.
This happened back apparently in April or so. Well, the report from the Privacy Commissioner didn't come out until the 17th of June or July. Forget when it happened. Gotcha. It's in the PDF file if you want to read it.
All right. Well, should we move on to a little outage that hit Windows Azure?
Sure.
I wonder, was this related to the Olympics? I noticed it's in the Europe. In the Europe, Alan. What happened?
It's not the data center that would cover London, though.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So at about 11 a.m. UTC on...
Oh, Alan's face froze. 11 a.m. UTC on what? You froze for a sec.
Oh, sorry. That's 11 a.m. UTC on July 26th. The Microsoft Azure Cloud for the Western Europe subregion experienced an unexplained outage that lasted a little over 2.5 hours.
It's funny that you're reporting on that as we're experiencing. We experienced a momentary outage on another Microsoft-related service.
Microsoft updated the dashboard with the news of the outage when it started, and then again 2 hours later they posted that they were still investigating, and then finally a little over 2.5 hours later they posted that the issue had been resolved. Although they didn't provide any explanation for the outage, saying only that we apologize for any inconvenience this outage may have caused our customers. The duration of the service interruption was approximately 2.5 hours and was resolved at 6:33 a.m. Pacific time, which is 13:33 a.m. or 13:33 UTC. Customers who have questions regarding this incident are encouraged to contact customer service and support.
There you go.
The previous big widespread outage for the Microsoft Azure Cloud was
a leap year one, right?
29th, which was the leap day bug.
Yeah.
That took down their servers for quite a while.
Right. There haven't, Azure, honestly, they're still working on it. It's new.
Yep. The Azure Cloud Western Europe subregion is powered by a data center in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, while Northern Europe subregion is hosted in Dublin, Ireland.
There you go. We know somebody who's in Dublin, Ireland. Maybe you can get us an inside track on what's going on there. Get the story. So now, when you see these kinds of things, Alan, do you think these really impact the overall adoption of Azure? Do you think people look at this kind of stuff and go, "Well, Azure has a bad history"?
It makes me wonder if Azure has some concept similar to Amazon's availability zones, where they try to have shared nothing between. So they'll have a bunch of. So in the same location, you would have a bunch of separate segments where if one of them has a problem, it's not supposed to affect the other ones.
Right.
So basically, if you spin up your instances, even if you want all your instances to be in Western Europe, you would just use multiple zones in Western Europe so that if one of them has a problem, it doesn't affect the other ones. But it seems that in order to accomplish that, in this case with Azure Cloud, you'd have to have one in Western Europe and one in Northern Europe. And between zones usually has a higher cost for transferring data back and forth, or you just don't have the same low latency you would have if they were in the same physical locality.
Right. Yep. Very true. All right. So, any other thoughts on that one?
Although the problem is that a lot of these cloud providers don't actually provide information like that.
Like I was just thinking, you kind of have to know. You'd kind of have to know. Right, but also, layout.
Like Amazon kind of hints at the fact that different availability zones for like US East may actually be different buildings. It might be like across town from each other.
They hint at that, though.
That's better, but is that always the case, or do they just have 4 separate?
It's probably because it changes so much they don't want to be pinned down. Maybe.
Right. Yeah. But basically, it might not be quite as good as they're saying, is what I'm hinting.
Right. Yeah, they might sweeten it up a little bit. Right, what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Alan, speaking of sweetening things up, let's talk about today's sponsor who's sponsoring the TechSNAP program, and that is, of course, the excellent GoDaddy.com. And when I say sweetening things up, I'm talking about the promo code for this month, special deal just for this month, if you use the code GO20OFF5. All right, follow me. GOOFF25. Now, why would you use that code? You save 20%. Boom! Use that code on anything at GoDaddy. I mean, .com? Yeah, sure. You got some hosting? Yep, sure. You're going to do a renewal? Why the heck not use that code GO20OFF5 when you're shopping at GoDaddy.com and save yourself 25% off your entire order. That's right, GO20OFF5. GO20OFF5 over at GoDaddy.com. It's a cool deal, and
yes,
only for this month. So, Alan, if you've got some renewals to do or you got something like that,
I do. So
there you go. Thank you to GoDaddy and their awesome code GO20OFF5. GO20OFF5. We'll have the link to it in the show notes too. So if I didn't drill that into your brain enough, just go click the link in the show notes.
One of the times you said it wrong.
I know, because it is kind of a hard one, you know. So I really wanted to see who's paying attention. It's a challenge, and if people are successful in my challenge, then they save money, 20%. You see, so it's a pretty good challenge. Anyways,
and on when you have a lot of domains like I do, that 20% adds up to a big number.
There you go. There you go. One last time, GO20OFF5. GO20OFF5. And thank you to GoDaddy.com for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. All right, Alan, with that's all done, let's go do the TechSNAP feedback. And thanks for sending your emails to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com or using the Contact Us form or the subreddit to submit your question to the show. We've got a whole batch, and this week we're going to start with a question that we skipped last week for time. And Alan, are you ready for the first question?
There was a question that came up before that one that I wanted to answer first because it's related.
Yeah. Okay, take it.
So yesterday, Scale Engine rented 9 new servers in different places around the world to expand our network.
Cool.
It was a day of shopping. That was fun.
Yeah.
And when I was talking about it, Tracy in the chat room asked how it is that I picked the different places that I put these servers.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And I thought that was an interesting question. How do you pick the provider for your dedicated server?
This is why people should watch live.
Before we get into the second question that we got bumped from last week is, what does it take to run a dedicated server?
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Yeah. So Tracy's question was, how do you pick a dedicated server provider? Now, my requirements are a little bit different than other people's, but there's some basic things you can consider for everybody.
Okay.
The first one that I always consider is, how diverse is their network in transit? So basically, how much internet do they have? And how many different places do they get internet from? Right?
Okay.
If they only have one provider, then there's a very good chance that that provider could have a problem or even just maintenance, and that your server will be down for hours at a time.
Right, yeah.
So you want somewhere that's multi-home, that has multiple connections, so that when one of them is down, the other ones are still working. And they have to have enough of that backup capacity to make up for one of them being down, right? If they have a big fat pipe from one provider and then like a small backup pipe,
right,
that works. But if the main one goes down during the middle of the day or something,
things are going to get slow.
Then the other pipe's not big enough.
Yeah.
Another thing is, do they operate their own AS number or autonomous system? So basically, do they have their own routers and they actually have their own agreements with bandwidth suppliers, or are they just a reseller for someone else?
Mm-hmm.
And if they're just a reseller, would you get a better deal by going directly there?
Right.
Sometimes it depends. Sometimes the resellers have better deals, or the upstream provider doesn't actually sell dedicated servers. They only sell, like, you have to use your own servers and bring them there. Uh-huh. Whereas if these guys are renting you the hardware as well, then maybe it's not a bad. For Scale Engine, location is a big question. Someone in the chat room asked why we have so many different locations. And for video streaming and also for our CDN, our goal is to have the content live as close to the user as possible. So when you're watching the live stream, you're usually connecting to a server that's fairly close to where you live rather than one that's halfway around the world, because there's less latency that way, and you end up with a better stream that way. Mm-hmm. But also because basically the providers we use higher grade transit than what a lot of ISPs use, right?
What does that mean, higher grade transit?
Basically, when you have your little home ISP, they're mostly dealing with a lot of incoming traffic, and they're basically buying from whichever places will sell it to them cheapest, right? Because they want to sell you lots of internet, but as cheap as they can.
Right.
Whereas the places that sell the dedicated servers, they're mostly dealing with being able to upload a lot to these various people that are downloading it.
Right.
And basically, they buy more expensive bandwidth because it's more reliable and it's better. But basically, some ISPs, like home ISPs, will have problems reaching certain other places. Like, for example, there's in Australia, there's a bunch of ISPs, most of which have some kind of peering that gets them connected directly to the States. Mm-hmm. However, we came across a couple of ISPs in Australia which basically route all their traffic to America through Japan.
Whoa.
And this causes a much higher latency and delay.
Yeah.
And we can end up sometimes seeing the same problems in Europe, where different ISPs in Europe won't have great connections over to the States, or even just great connections to certain of our servers over in the States. So by making them connect to a server that's already in Europe, they're more likely to get a good connection that way.
Right.
And the connection between our servers are good. So if we sent the user directly to our server in the States, they wouldn't have a great connection. But if we send the content from the server you publish this live stream to, which is in the States, directly to a server in Germany, then users in Germany get it from there, they'll end up with a better connection.
Aren't I streaming? I stream to a box in Seattle or something, right?
So, you used to stream to a box in Atlanta, but we moved it so you now stream to a box in Seattle because your ISP was not having great transit getting all the way to Atlanta, because they tried to use their own internal network to do it rather than dumping the traffic onto a backbone in Seattle. They drove it themselves all the way to Chicago and then dumped it on a backbone.
Saves them money, but gives me...
But their network only has so much capacity, and they're basically trying to keep that at like 100% all the time, as opposed to offloading some of the traffic to a more expensive transit that they don't own.
But Seattle's literally just down the road from me. So
yes, and so basically now you have a ping of like 2 seconds instead of 40 seconds, or 2 milliseconds instead of 40 milliseconds.
But then people still are watching live all around the world, and they're just getting a copy of it from the Seattle location, right?
Right. Yep. And so location for us is important. For regular people, you might want one that's closest to where your users are, because if you're only going to have one, you want it to be in a nice place that's kind of between all your users. So like in the States, Chicago is a popular place because it's not really on the East Coast or the West Coast, it's kind of in the middle, and it's also just a very popular hub. Almost all internet connections that go across the country will flow through there because of its central location.
Right.
So that's something to consider is the location. Because also we found that servers in Europe tend to be cheaper than servers in the States, for what we're doing anyway, for higher bandwidth applications. But we wouldn't put all of our servers in Europe because our users in the US would suffer because of that. Yeah.
So Stefan in the chat room points out that they're not technically getting the stream from Seattle, right? So I got the technical details wrong, but
you're right. They're getting it from a server in Germany, and the server in Germany is getting it from Seattle.
Okay, all right, there you go. That makes sense. There you go. Thank you, Stefan.
So all of our servers around the world will connect to the origin where the stream is. Now, we have a bunch of different origins in different places, including one in Germany for European users or European publishers. But anyway.
So the connectivity is obviously a big point. And have you talked about power?
Usually when you're renting a dedicated server, power's not really a factor.
No, for you, when you're looking. I mean, what is your requirement for power?
What do you mean, power? Like electricity?
Yeah, like if you're looking at a data center to see if it's qualified.
We're renting individual servers.
Okay.
Europe, especially for places in other countries, we rent individual servers because if they break, the service provider has to fix it, not us.
And that's nice for remote locations.
Power density is important when we're doing rack space for our own gear that we have in Toronto.
Yeah.
But it's less important. It's not usually a factor when you're renting individual servers because they've already factored that in.
Yeah, and it's the point you make there is nice because if it's in a faraway location and they are responsible for the hardware, that's pretty important.
And it's actually one of the points I'll get to in a second as well. The other one is additional bandwidth, especially because we're doing video streaming, which uses a lot. We sometimes will need more than what's included in the package, right? The server comes with like 5 terabytes of bandwidth or whatever, right?
Sure.
It's like, but if they don't list the price for more, they're probably not really set up for you to use even all 5,000 gigabytes, right? So if they don't list a price to sell you more, then
it's likely they're banking
on the fact that you're never going to use that much.
Yeah. Very true.
Yeah. And also, a lot of places now you'll see selling unmetered packages where they just let you use up to the maximum connection speed. So they'll just give you like a 100 megabit port and you can use as much bandwidth as you want. The problem with that is usually what they're doing is overselling. So they have like 48 servers in a switch. That switch has a single gigabit uplink to the internet. And those 48 servers fight over that 1 gigabit. Meaning you could get as little as like 20 megabits. But in a lot of cases, that's all you really need. So maybe it's okay, but you can also expect to suffer serious packet loss because of that. If once that gigabit gets maxed out, everybody suffers really badly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, if they sell, basically for Scale Engine, we only ever buy metered packages where we pay for a set amount of bandwidth that they guarantee, and we have the option of buying more if we need it. Because we'd rather pay for more than have an unlimited package that ends up not being able to deliver.
Right. Yeah. You want consistency.
Yeah. A very important question, especially depending on what you're using the server for, is an SLA or service level agreement. It's basically their promise to you of what level of service you're going to get, and usually spells out the remedies when they fail that. So, for example, a lot of our ISPs have a hardware SLA saying, for example, if the power supply or hard drive in your server dies, when you report it to us, we'll have it replaced within 4 hours. If it's not replaced within 4 hours, we will start refunding you X amount of your monthly fee for every hour beyond 4 hours that it takes. So,
or with like, it could be something like, in some cases, internet connectivity outages as well.
Yes. So for an example with one of our providers in the States is hardware SLA is 4 hours. If they don't replace the hard drive within 4 hours, we get a 5% refund up to a maximum of 100% refund for every hour beyond 4 that it takes.
Yeah, it's nice.
Power and network, they have 100% SLA. So if power ever goes out, or if the network is ever unavailable for even 1 second, then that SLA kicks in. And then they measure in 5-minute increments. So if it's out for any amount of time, the minimum that you would be refunded is for each 5-minute block.
Wow, that's pretty fair. That's nice.
It works out to a large number. And basically, it guarantees that they're going to make the network available 100% of the time. And if it's not, you're going to get this amount of money back.
Now, do you care to share or do you have any rough ideas what you pay for that?
It depends on the provider. Some provide, 100% network SLA is usually provided as part of the service.
Yeah.
For the hardware SLAs, a lot of places have different tiers. Like the free tier is we'll replace it within a day. Or if you pay an extra $40 a month, we'll promise we'll replace it within 2 hours. Something like that. Different places will have different pricing packages.
I just don't know if people that haven't dealt with data center costs before have an idea of the kind of cost. I mean, you could be talking about a connection, a solid fast internet connection with that kind of SLA could be multiple $1,000s per month in some cases.
Right, but in this case, you're usually renting a single server which has 100 or 1 gigabit connection with an X amount of transfer on it. And so this isn't really picking data centers. This is just picking dedicated server providers. It's not quite the same.
Yeah.
But SLAs like that usually only come from places that have better connections.
Yeah.
Part of it is a provider was only willing to provide an SLA saying they'll have 100% network uptime or they'll give you your money back.
If they can do it.
They think they're going to be able to do 100% uptime.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it's usually the good ones that can even offer it. They won't offer it if they can't do it, for sure. Otherwise, it costs them too much.
Another question is about the hardware that you're renting. Are you getting quality server hardware, like proper server chassis with like Xeon chips or whatever, or is it repurposed desktops like old Pentiums or like i3s and i5s? While the repurposed desktop type hardware is less expensive and therefore can be attractive, if you're doing anything critical with it, you might want to avoid it because a lot of times the difference between something like if you go back a little bit to the socket 775 Intels. Like a quad-core Q9650 was 4 cores of 3 gigahertz and cost it was like $300 for the processor. Then there was the X3370, which was a Xeon chip.
Yeah.
Exactly the same amount of cache, exactly the same clock speed and cores and everything. They were compatible with all the same motherboards. It was basically identical chip, but because it was Xeon on it, it had a better mean time between failure. There was less chance it was going to break, and so it cost more money.
So they obviously were just binning the ones that would test as more reliable. They would bin them as Xeons, and the ones that would test as less reliable, they were just selling them to consumers?
Yeah. basically.
Usually the Xeons have like a little more cache. Like in some cases, they have multi-megabytes more cache.
Yes, but the Q9650 was a high-end processor.
Yeah. It depends on the run.
Yeah. So there's a number of factors there. It can also affect the functionality and some of the other possible features that we'll get to in a minute, like out-of-band management. You're not going to find that on repurposed desktops. But basically, if it's just a server to host a game server or something, an i7-based one is fine. But, something more server grade might be better for a lot of other things. And it can also come down to hard drives as well, especially hard drives. If you're running with just a single hard drive and not doing like mirroring, then if you're using just a regular off-the-shelf Western Digital desktop hard drive, your chances of failure are about 4 times higher than using an enterprise-grade SATA or SAS drive.
And it's interesting now, you're saying this based on experience too, because I know that there's probably a lot of IT guys out there who maybe haven't run as many servers, but I have this argument frequently when I go to clients that they don't want to pay for the enterprise-level hard drives.
Yep. And it depends what you're doing. If you do mirroring, you maybe can run 2 cheaper hard drives for the same price as one better hard drive with a lower mean time between failure. And with the 2 of them in a mirror, you're probably actually going to get better reliability. But it also comes down to how reliable does it need to be. Our edge servers that are just taking video in, take one copy of the video in and send it out to 1,000 people, they don't even really need a hard drive. And if that hard drive fails and takes the machine offline, our global server load balancer routes around that machine until we fix it.
And those are also a great use case for tiny SSD drives, the cheapo SSD drives that just need the OS. And
so in some of our European locations, we do have cheaper hardware because it doesn't matter.
Although, look at the way Google does it, right? I mean, that's what Google's data centers are famous for, is just off-the-shelf, literally on-a-shelf components that they just fail all the time.
Yep. So one of the other things we look for a lot, it's more of a really, really nice to have, but not necessarily a requirement, is out-of-band management. Systems like IPMI or DRAC or ILO or whatever, especially ones with remote media or virtual media. But basically, having the ability to have KVM access as if you were sitting at the machine makes it much easier to manage the machine and fix it when something goes wrong.
You get full console, so you can actually navigate the BIOS. You can, in some cases, like you're saying, attach a virtual ISO image as a CD drive, so you can reload the OS through your, in some cases, like through a web browser.
Where that's come in a couple times is one of the criteria that Scale Engine has is that the provider offer FreeBSD, right? Because all of our servers are FreeBSD. And there are some places where, like, well, our technical staff are only proficient with Linux. We were not really going to support it. And so sometimes they don't list it as an option when you're configuring a server to buy it.
Right.
But a lot of those places are like, well, we have the IPMI or KVM with virtual media. So if you were willing to install it yourself, you can have it. And like,
which, of course, you are.
Fine with that. Yeah. It's like, I would rather do that.
Right, exactly. You mean, I don't have to give you a root account? Yeah, I think I'm okay with that.
Well, also, some of it is that they'll deliver the machine faster to us if they don't have to install the OS. Right? They just have to turn the machine on. If the machine's already built and in the rack, if we're buying like a pre-configured machine that they don't have to build, if they just have to turn it on and give us the IPMI access, then we can have the server in 15 minutes.
And this sounds silly. It sounds silly, but it also proves that you have remote KVM access, because when somebody sets up a system, I've had this happen to me where they go, okay, here you go, Mr. Fisher, here's the SSH login, you're good to go. And I just fire up terminal and I just go into it all day long until I reboot it after a kernel update and it forgot to update grub and I couldn't get the IP KVM to work either. And I realized, oh yeah, I never tested it. But if you have to do the install, you're going to try it.
Yeah, it's something I always test. It's on my checklist.
Yep. That's good, man. Have a checklist.
Yeah. There's a lot of things that go into picking a dedicated server, and it really depends what you're going to use it for. Sometimes you're going to want fancier features like the RAID and so on. For a lot of our servers, we don't bother, but
right. Yeah.
Our pickiness is usually for Scale Engine. We're looking for places that offer a gigabit uplink instead of 100 megabit, and plenty of terabytes of transfer, and basically the ability that we would be able to saturate the entire gigabit. One of the first things we do when we get a new server is what I call validating it, is actually getting on there with an application like iPerf, which we talked about the other week, which is a TCP performance testing tool, and actually making sure that the server can upload a gigabit per second. And if it can't, then start complaining.
Yeah. Say, hey, we're not getting what we're paying for.
Because also you need to inventory the machine and make sure it has the specs you paid for. There was a mistake at one of the providers one time where I got like 2 gigabytes of RAM instead of 8.
I could see that. Yeah, because...
And they're like, oh, sorry, our mistake. And they fixed it within like 30 minutes.
They just mess up the order.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was I ordered the stock one and then made modifications to it. And yeah, they just didn't notice or whatever.
Well, that came from... so that question was inspired from Tracy in the live chat room. There you go. Watch us live over jblive.tv at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, or jblive.info for the audio stream. All right. Should we get to Simon's question?
Yes.
All right, so Simon says, he writes in and says, I'm looking at getting a dedicated web server, possibly more than one if my site got popular. However, I'm finding it hard to get clear information on what's involved in administering a Dedi server. I like that. Any chance you could give a newbie a guide on the basics, what's essential, common screw-ups to avoid, recommended software, anything really. I'm looking at Linux, the Havana Wana web server. He's not committed to that, though. He just wants to avoid Apache, basically. He's going to have fast CGI apps. He's going to be using MySQL as well. And he's trying to plan for scalability. He'll admit, though, that he's struggling with knowing how to implement all of this. And his web app will be written with Google Web Toolkit using Ajax. He says, one area I'm really lost in, though, is monitoring. How do you go about that? I appreciate that. It's important. But where do I start? He says, my choice of FastCGI was for performance reasons, but no code has been written yet. And the Hayawana Vana Bana Bing Bang has good PHP integration. You know, I'm not familiar with that web server.
I've never heard of it either.
So feel free to slap me. I think Alan would say use Nginx. Yes. Love the show, and I wish I found them a couple of years ago instead of just the last few months. Well, okay, so he's got a lot he's trying to pull off, Alan. Do you have anywhere you want to start?
Yeah, but basically some of the common things are that when you administer a Linux or BSD or even a Windows server, you have to do a lot of things, and you have to do a lot of things on a consistent basis. So first thing is doing the updates, especially security updates, right? If you're using Ubuntu, for example, you have to use the update in their thing, or the Windows server has to have the Windows updates, or BSD, the BSD updates. For example, we talked about a couple of, I guess it'd be more than a month ago now, about the that bug in the way Intel implemented AMD 64 different.
Yep.
And some operating systems had a vulnerability.
Yep.
There's actually an exploit out for that now, where someone can get root privileges if you haven't patched your machine yet.
So as an example of something you want to stay on top of.
Yeah. And especially if you're running a web server where you're going to be hosting other people's code that you didn't write. It's very, like, especially if, for example, if you're going to host a lot of WordPress blogs that are each administered by the user that owns that WordPress blog, those users are they're going to not update their blog software.
Right.
It's just going to happen.
Right.
And, you know, that software is eventually going to be compromised.
Or like he mentioned he was going to use some Google, I forgot what the
Google Web Toolkit.
Which, and if there's a vulnerability found in something, you know, for example, if he's reliant on something else, there's a vulnerability found in that something else that still impacts him.
But yeah, so installing updates is important because you're going to have to keep, you know, PHP up to date, MySQL up to date, right? We talked about exploits for that recently.
Yep.
The web server itself, whether that's Nginx, which is what I recommend, especially for doing fast CGI stuff, and just the Linux itself. Now, if you're going to use some kind of control panel to make this easier, like Plesk or WHMCS or whatever it was called,
cPanel or one of those.
cPanel is popular, or DirectAdmin, you have to keep those up to date as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that you know, it doesn't sound like he's going to go that route if he's doing this.
Right. If this is just to run one web app, then you don't want those control panels. They will actually make more of a mess than help.
So one of the spots he's stuck in is the basics for keeping a dedicated server. So you got your updates.
So yeah, you got to do all your updates to keep it secure. Backups are something people forget to do.
We're going to talk about TarSnap.
Yeah, but you have to back everything up often, and you have to back it up in a consistent state. Right? If you're backing up your app and some of the files in the app changed in the middle of the backup, do you now have half the app in the old version and half the app in the new version? And then your backup of your app is now useless because it's broken. And also, how do you back up your MySQL database? You know, the only way to get a consistent backup of the MySQL database usually is to somehow take it offline. And you're not going to want to shut your site down for a couple hours every day to back it up, right?
Right.
So then maybe you need a slave that's read-only that replicates all the stuff has a copy of the site that you can turn on and off to do backups. Although Percona makes a tool called Hot Backup that allows you to take a backup without stopping the database.
Okay.
And there's a number of different things to look into there. But remember, for your backups, you don't want to just have a copy of everything, because that's not really a backup, right? If you have, if every night you copy everything to a second server, that's not actually a backup, because if it takes you 2 days to notice that something was broken,
right.
then your backup is no good either.
Right.
Your backup needs to be an archive. You need to be able to step back in time at a number of different iterations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, if you're doing proper differential backups, then you're going to save space and bandwidth doing that as well. So it probably overkill for a single server, but something like Bacula is always good. Some of the more simple ones that we've talked about in other episodes about backups, probably better if you're doing just 1 or 2 servers. But if you're doing a lot, then something like Bacula is very nice.
Yeah. I also would. I'm very much trying to get Bacula implemented at a client of mine.
Yeah.
So Alan, what about the monitoring aspect?
Yeah, so monitoring, you have a number of different choices. I use Nagios mostly because I started with it and already have it set up, so changing over was an issue.
Mm-hmm.
I've tried Zabbix. It looks okay, although the graphing solution stores data in MySQL instead of an RRD, so you have to delete the data as it gets older, otherwise it's going to take up all your space.
Yeah.
Whereas with an RRD, you keep averaging it out, and you keep less granularity in the data, but you get data, so you can compare your bandwidth usage back to like a year ago to see what the difference is, and I find that useful.
Let's see, any other points we should touch on?
So I like Nagios, but beyond installing Nagios, you have to set it up to monitor different things, and so you need the different agent programs. And I monitor all kinds of things like the CPU time. I have one graph that's just idle versus how much of the CPU is idle, and that's one graph. But I have another one that breaks down the CPU time by type, right? Was it user, nice, system, interrupt, and so on?
Right.
And so I can notice changes in what is using the CPU.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at free RAM and free swap, and with alerts on those, if the amount of free swap starts to go down from 100%, then something's obviously eating up all the RAM and needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
But you can look at all kinds of things. Like we monitor our web servers and look at stats like the number of incoming connections per second, the number of requests per second, how many requests are currently being written to. And if that starts to build up, it usually means that it's not able to answer fast enough for one reason or another. Mm-hmm. Something's holding it up, like the database is too slow or it's out of upload bandwidth or whatever. Mm-hmm. So there's all kinds of different factors you can monitor. And for example, you want to monitor free space on the hard drive. So you get an alert when, say, /var is running out of space and because your logs aren't being rotated properly.
Right.
Because the worst way to find out that your logs aren't being rotated properly is when your database runs out of space.
Yep.
But basically, if you're going to have your own dedicated server, you have to be dedicated to constantly keeping it up to date and monitoring it, making sure it's working, checking it. It's really a full-time job. And so if you're not up to that, you might be better off getting some other type of solution where you aren't responsible for the security of the server.
And you could always, if you go with the right solution, you could always move. You could always start somewhere so you can focus on the actual application code. And then when you feel like you need the flexibility and customizability of having your own server, then move. As long as all the technology you're using are universal and standard. Yeah.
So Metal Freak brings up a point in the chat room is that just scripting it to automatically install updates isn't necessarily the best solution, because sometimes there's a problem, right?
Yeah.
A new package of PHP comes out and it breaks something. You don't want to be deploying that automatically and wondering what happened.
Yeah.
Right? So especially if you're doing a production environment for a web app or something, you'd have a second environment somewhere that you do for your development, and you would test the new version of the packages there first, and only once you're sure they're going to work would you then deploy those updates onto the main server.
And that's a great opportunity to play with virtualization.
Yeah, a virtualization or a bunch of other things.
Yeah, yeah. Throw a copy of your production system into VirtualBox, apply the updates, see what breaks.
And make sure everything works properly.
Should we go to the next question? Or do you have any other thoughts on that one?
Not really. Fast CGI for performance reasons is a good, really good plan, especially if you're going to end up with more than one server.
Yeah.
Because you can just set up the fast CGIs on the second server and have something like Nginx load balance between the two sets of fast CGIs. And that allows you to scale that site out to multiple servers a lot easier than some other way.
There you go. That solves this other problem.
There are some other problems for doing that, but we discussed that, I think, last week or the week before.
Yeah. Well, there you go. All right, so this next one is a quick one. It came from Glitter Gulch in the TechSNAP subreddit over at techsnap.reddit.com or links.techsnap.tv. And he asks, could you talk a little more about TarSnap? I hear you guys mention it all the time on the show, but I don't really understand what it is. All right, Alan.
I don't know all about it because up until recently, you couldn't buy it in Canada because of Colin didn't want to bother with the tax implications of selling to Canadians. Basically, he would have to charge sales tax, and he didn't want to deal with the paperwork and so on. Right.
I laugh, but I understand.
Yeah, he's like, I'll sell to anybody else in the world, but not the country I live in because they would try to charge me tax.
Yeah.
Basically, it's a backup service based on Colin's BSD diff algorithm, which is used for FreeBSD update and port snap. Basically, it's a way to find the differences between files and sync them. So basically, what TarSnap does is make an AES encrypted tar file of whatever you're trying to back up, and then just sync the differences to his service. So basically, it's using Amazon's cloud storage to hold your backup files.
Okay.
But the files are always encrypted on your machine with a key that only you have before they're transmitted to the service. So Colin's a fan of saying that you don't have to trust him to not spy on his stuff because he doesn't have your key.
Right.
He doesn't have the ability to accidentally or purposefully leak your private information.
That's like one of the most attractive features.
Yeah.
So TarSnap is pretty simple, but it's got a good, robust backend storage, and it's got that client-side encryption, which means that you encrypt before it ever transmits.
And the client is completely open source. So you can download the source code for the client and go over it and decide that you trust it.
And they also have like an active bug bounty. So if people find something,
active bug bounty program, including for just style errors. Although the bounties are smaller for style errors.
Yeah, it's $2 for a pre-release version and $1 if it's on a. That's funny. He actually, this is interesting. He pays more if you find it in the pre-release.
Right, because he wants to promote people looking at the code that he hasn't quite released yet.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
So there you go.
That stuff was all covered in his talk at BSDCan that we linked a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, that's right. We should remind people we did link to it.
I've never used it mostly because I just back up my stuff to my own servers because I have that capacity. Most people don't have giant storage servers with 20 terabytes of storage available.
Right.
I just happen to have that, so I make use of that myself instead.
I have never used TarSnap either, but I'm very interested in the service. It seems like it's pretty solid. Should we go to another?
It's, backup for the truly paranoid.
Yeah, like me. All right, so the next question came in from the TechSNAP subreddit, and this is more so of just an FYI. It came in from Chimaka Kamako, and he says, this morning I noticed that every website I tried to go to would redirect me to the Time Warner EULA, that's his ISP. Mm-hmm. I went into pfSense and I changed my DNS to OpenDNS and turned off DHCP's DNS. It worked, and I'm no longer forced to visit that page, but has anyone else seen this? I know a while back Time Warner was doing this with 404 pages and redirecting them to search, but it's essentially they're doing it at the DNS level.
Well, it seems here basically they're trying to make sure everyone sees the change in their end user license agreement and actively agrees to it, rather than just changing it and saying, by continuing to use our service, you agreed to this thing that you didn't know about.
Yeah, I guess that is true.
Basically, it seems like a typical captive portal like you would see on a Wi-Fi network where you have to agree to terms before you can start using their Wi-Fi.
Mm-hmm. Those suck, though, because they screw with like devices. I mean, they really mess with stuff.
Yes. Basically, your whole internet doesn't work until you open a web browser and go to a page and agree to silliness.
I hate that.
Yeah, and so that's, Time Warner is basically going to be doing that. And then, it probably breaks a lot of things, like probably your Xbox isn't going to be able to hit the service properly until you open up a browser on a computer and agree to this.
Or your smartphone will be able to check its email.
Right.
It's silly. All right, well, that was just an FYI. And,
they are apparently using the fact that they control your DNS servers to direct you to this page.
All right, so this next one came in. It's about the Raspberry Pi and using it in terms of a router. This came from Archie, and he says, I took the idea of running the Raspberry Pi as a router or / firewall, and the tests look good. It's running Raspbian, and I was able to max out my internet connection though the GUI output was stuttering. He said it should be able to do almost everything on my other routers, sans the 1 gigabit connection. My experience with this level of networking is limited, but after a couple of hours of research and a USB to Ethernet adapter, very nice, I was able to get the Raspberry Pi to set DHCP forward packets and set the DNS to a single computer. I'm hoping to get a decent web interface, Snort, and a few other things to make this into a cheap, extensible home router. Thanks for the great show. It's made my job easier. So how neat is that? Talk about the ultimate low-power router box.
The issue being that the Ethernet, the Ethernet port that's there is actually a PCI one, or sorry, it's actually USB, not PCI. So it's already on the USB bus. So when you put both of them on USB bus, you're eventually going to run out of bandwidth there. But you know, if your internet connection is not that fast, it's perfectly fine. And technically, the USB bus has 480 megabits of, so 100 in and 100 out, the two USB sticks should technically be possible. So, you know, if I was going to do this, I might want to try running iPerf through it to see how much throughput I can actually get in and out of a router like this. But yeah, it was one of the first things I thought of. I was like, why don't they have a version of this with two Ethernet ports? Because I would buy one.
Totally. I would love to see that.
But if they're both on USB, it kind of hampers the usefulness a little bit. But again, this wasn't designed to be a router.
No.
It was designed for a bunch of other things.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting use case. And I think it's cool.
All right, why don't we do the next email? This one comes in from a fellow named Chris, and it's just kind of a Bitcoin update. He says, hey, guys, been with you since season 1 of LAS and never missed an episode of TechSNAP. He said, he kind of goes on about Bitcoins. He mentions that if I'm not using the Bitcoins that I have laying around, that I'm more than welcome to send them to him. He even includes his Bitcoin address there for me if I just want to forward those along. He was actually kind of curious in his email. He says, why are you sitting on the Bitcoins? I don't know. Maybe I'll pay somebody something.
The price has doubled since.
I know, right? That's why I thought we'd read this email, because he goes on to say that there's more and more things popping up, including ways to now pay for things on Amazon with Bitcoin, and you can also exchange your Bitcoins now for real hard-world cash, and then they'll send it back to you via PayPal or Dwolla. He also talks about some of the other things that are going on in the world of Bitcoin. And I just wanted to include this email because, yeah, it does seem like Bitcoin's got a little more stink behind it again. I'm going to sit out.
It's basically a lot of the stuff is settled down. Like, there was a lot of hype and craziness going on, but now that things have started to settle down a bit and people have had time to actually figure out what works and what doesn't and so on.
Yeah.
There are a couple of the dedicated server providers I use that will accept Bitcoins.
Yep. I've seen a couple too. That's interesting.
And that's part of the reason I'm sitting on some of mine is someday I'll probably just use them to pay for something. That's
what I figure. Maybe even if it's like remote consulting work or something.
For example, that cloudcrack.com will accept Bitcoins.
There you go. I've seen VPN services that will help you get the BBC feed of the Olympics that take Bitcoin.
Yes, actually, that was a different story I saw, but apparently VPN usage has been up quite a bit because if you look like you're from the UK, then the BBC feeds are open, whereas NBC's feeds require that you have some kind of cable subscription.
I can't watch them because I don't have any cable subscription, so I can't. Yeah. So if I wanted to watch live, I would have to use a VPN.
We're watching one of the TV stations in Iceland as a streaming customer of ours. It's very interesting to see some of the events with Icelandic voiceovers.
Yeah, their perspective and their voiceover.
Well, Icelandic just sounds so much different than other language. It's like, how do you make those sounds?
All right. So Carl, just KRL writes in. He says, do we trust Hushmail? I'm a big fan of TechSNAP. I really like all the news about all the cracks and etc. I'm wondering a rather off-topic question, though, but maybe you and Alan have experience on the whole security topic here. Hushmail.com states to be the most secure web-based free email service in the world. I'm wondering if this is really a trusted site, since I need a secure email.
Now, I would prefer to do something that was all based on my own computer. Like I have Enigmail installed in my Thunderbird and use GPG that way.
That's the best way.
Although Hushmail can be pretty good. They have two different options. One where they store your key for you, so you don't have to carry it around with you. And in that option, they technically could have the ability to read your emails. They claim they don't, but they could.
And I asked on Google Plus and Twitter, and some people wrote back and said they cooperated with the feds a couple of years ago. So
right, but
I don't know what that means.
You know, if they're required to do so, that's fine. But if they only have the encrypted version of your email, there's nothing they can disclose.
Yeah.
Right? If all your email is encrypted, then that's fine if they cooperate.
The best they could do is disclose who you've been maybe communicating with. Yeah, he emailed this person at this time, but we don't know the contents.
Right. But that's why I prefer to do something myself instead. If you need it to be absolutely secure, if you do everything yourself, that you don't trust anyone else, then it'll be more secure.
Yeah.
But if you use the option where you control the key, not them, it's reasonably secure.
I think, no, Alan, you nailed it with Enigma. I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes so you can grab that. Yeah, Enigma.
Also, it's not developed anymore, but there's a Firefox plugin that's open source that you can get called FireGPG.
Oh, yeah.
And it was originally designed to allow you to do GPG inside Gmail. But the problem was the interface in Gmail would change every 2 weeks and keep breaking the plugin. So the developer kind of moved on. However, if you're using it in just a regular box, you can basically select a section of text in an input box, right-click, and encrypt it with GPG.
That's cool.
Yeah, I still use that for a couple of things.
Yeah, that was the overwhelming response on Twitter and on the Google Plus was just use GPG or your own local encryption if you really care about it. And I think maybe his concern was messing it up. Yeah,
but also email. This comes down to everybody. Unless everybody that emails you sends you GPT encrypted email, then people can read the plain text emails you get.
Yeah, that's the nice thing about Hushmail, right? Is the other person could get a Hushmail account, and it'd be a good way, if they're not very technically literate, to still be fairly... I would say that would probably be the use case for Hushmail, is if you're working with somebody else who you also want to be encrypted, and you don't trust them to manage using software on their local PC. Right? I would think so. All right. Well,
GPG stands for GNU Privacy Guard.
Any other thoughts on that one?
Which is... basically GNU implementation of PGP, which was stood for pretty good privacy.
Pretty good. It's pretty good. Thank you.
You can tell they're serious about privacy when they don't claim that it's absolutely perfect privacy.
Right. All right. Well, thank you for sending your emails to TechSNAP@JupiterBroadcasting.com using the contact form or the subreddit. And Alan, with all of the feedback done, that must mean it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. And welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that didn't quite make it to the top of the show, but we still wanted to talk about them, maybe give you a little linkage to follow up on your own later on. And many of these links were powered by our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. Now, Alan, are you ready for the great news, the first story in the Roundup?
Yep.
It is, and I didn't believe the headline when I saw it. In fact, I waited for it to be confirmed by multiple news outlets before I let myself get excited. But it would appear the Cybersecurity Act of 2012 is dead for the year. It failed to get...
Basically, they didn't get around to dealing with all the possible amendments, and so they'll come back to it after the summer recess.
Right, but that's 5 weeks, and they've already said that, with the election and all of that they're just going to put it off likely until 2013.
Yeah. The funny thing was some of the amendments and how they had nothing to do with cybersecurity.
Well, like they limited... Yeah, there was one in there to limit gun ammo and some things like that.
The sale of high-capacity magazines. One was to restrict... abortions in Washington, D.C. after 20 weeks, and there was one to repeal Obamacare as an amendment to a cybersecurity bill.
And I guess
American government makes me laugh.
One of the little problems with this bill is that the vast majority of the bill wasn't. They didn't give it up for review. They were going to have to vote on it without actually having seen it, which is just incredible.
Well, the EFF did an analysis of it and found a lot of places where they were just overly vague, such that tools like Ping and Wireshark could technically be considered hacker tools and be illegal, and just all kinds of nonsense that made absolutely no sense.
The vote basically came down party lines. The right voted against it because the U.S. Chamber of Commerce was against it, and the left voted for it because Obama wanted it. So, but it just wasn't enough.
The bill made no sense. It wasn't drafted by anyone that knew anything about the internet.
Yeah. We will be covering a little bit more about that on Unfilter, which will be live tonight at 7 p.m. Pacific, but it'll also be available Friday for download.
Make sure you grab that EFF link for your show and talk about their analysis of the bill.
We played last week. We played some clips of the Senate where they're trying to pitch why we need the cybersecurity, and it was laughable. Some of the things they were saying, it's just laughable. And really, any legislation they passed any of the Cybersecurity Act didn't actually force any major drastic changes to the way things are secured. All it really was allowing private companies to share user data with the government, and they wouldn't be held liable if something private leaked. It didn't really address things like they were talking about the SCADA systems or all of these things which really just need to be disconnected from the public internet, and that would fix their vulnerabilities. It was funny. It just I don't understand where they're going with it, but I'm pleased to see that it's been put to bed for at least a little bit. Although I'm sure that's not the end of that. All right, Alan. Well, the next story kind of got Ubisoft in a lot of heat this week, but they fixed it pretty quick. Ubisoft was claimed that their DRM came with a rootkit that would give websites potentially administrative level access over desktop. So I have that right? Is that what you grokked? And now they've already released, once it was discovered, within like an hour they had a patch out. But now everybody has to go out and patch that has a game that uses the Ubisoft DRM, which is like a ton of games. Yep. So it's this massive flaw though, where through the web browser they could get all the way down to kernel level access to a Windows box. So people, if you have a Ubisoft game, go check the updates. All right, Alan. The next story in the roundup, just moving right along, is an update on the Dropbox story we covered, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago, where Dropbox said they brought in a third party to do a security audit. You remember that? Yep. Now they've shared the results of the security audit. Ars Technica has a great write-up on it, but they also posted on their blog. Turns out there might have been somewhat of a compromise, including a spreadsheet that had user...
Yes, they explained that somebody used a stolen password to access the Dropbox account of a Dropbox employee, and that account contained a project document with a bunch of users' email addresses and all kinds of other data in it.
Oh, Dropbox. Now, they did say that they're going to try to take steps to make sure it doesn't happen again, and they'll be introducing two-factor authentication using your smartphone somehow, although they didn't give more information on that. What do you think of that?
Apparently, they also talked about a bunch of other Dropbox accounts got hacked, but they don't think it's related. It mostly seemed to be attempts to use username and password combinations found from other sites, like the Last.fm hack, the LinkedIn attack, and all those.
Which makes sense.
They tried those common passwords against a list of known Dropbox email addresses, and you get access to people's Dropboxes.
I buy that. That's what the issue was. Now, I don't know what type...
Basically, a Dropbox employee somehow lost their password to an attacker or had an overly weak password.
And I'll be interested to see what they come up with the two-factor authentication. I hope they're going to use the Google Authenticator, since I already have LastPass and my Gmail account using that. It would be really nice if I had one more thing using that. Although since they already have their own smartphone app, I wouldn't be too surprised to just see them roll out something with that. But we'll see. The two-factor thing I like. All right, Alan. Now, this next story in the roundup, I believe you tossed in here. It says a startup discovered that 80% of the Facebook ads that it bought were getting clicked on from robots.
Right. So basically, you pay to put the ad up and you only pay for clicks. But they found that 80% of the clicks were people that didn't even have JavaScript enabled and were most likely not even real users, but actually just robots.
Just bots.
And driving up they're so basically wasting all this startup's ad money.
Facebook ads are kind of a premium ad, too. They're not the cheapest ads out there.
Right. And, this Google spends a lot of time and energy trying to prevent these types of click fraud.
Right. In fact, almost over-aggressively, I've known very legitimate people who've gotten their AdSense accounts turned off because Google supposedly detected fraud. So, All right. Interesting, though.
So basically this company is, trying to get a lot of attention by talking about not having a Facebook page anymore. It's like,
it kind of feels
why did you have a Facebook page in the first place?
It kind of feels a little bit like attention grabbing.
Yeah.
There was this app that was in the Android marketplace for 99 cents, and the developer came out a couple weeks ago and said, Android piracy is so awful that we can't make a buck in here. We're going free with in-purchase and ads. The Android marketplace is so horrible. But we're going to keep the Charge app in the iOS market. And then yesterday they announced, well, there's a lot of piracy in iOS. We're going to get out of the iOS market. It's attention is what it is. Yeah. It's attention. All right, next story.
Yeah, the last story. HP, which is one of the companies behind the OpenStack initiative, which was started by Rackspace, but includes NASA and Dell and Pier 1 and a bunch of other companies. They're now, on their cloud system, they're offering a $20 a month credit towards running instances on their thing. So it's similar to Amazon's, you get 1 year free of one small instance.
Yeah.
Well, HP instead gives you a $20 credit that you can spend any way you want in their system, and you get the $20 every month. For I don't know what the length of the offer is, but it allows you to, mix and match all their different services, because OpenStack has a bunch of different sub-services, including storage, CDN, virtual machines, so on.
Yeah.
But, OpenStack is very popular and based on Ubuntu. And
that's one of the options, right? It could also be SUSE or...
Yeah, you can run quite a few different things on it.
Yeah.
Although the server side, there's also some options, like it can run on top of a Zen server or a Ubuntu box with Zen or a Ubuntu box with
It is
KDE.
interesting, though, to see the success that the Ubuntu server variant's having with OpenStack. If you would have told me 2 years ago that Ubuntu would start to become a credible competitor to Red Hat Enterprise, I would have told you to shut up. You're crazy. You're drinking something, right? But it's starting to happen. It's kind of weird.
But it's interesting to see HP having its own cloud offering.
Yeah.
We have Microsoft and Amazon and Google and so on.
And technically Apple has their own thing. And these people are going off and building... But see, the thing I like what HP's doing is it's based on OpenStack. So I could move between Rackspace and HP's.
Yeah. And also, the OpenStack itself has API compatibility with Amazon.
Oh, yeah. Very true. Very true. All right, Alan. Well, I think that's all of the news we have for this week, all of the roundup stuff. I just want to give a quick update about the Jupiter Broadcasting Chrome extension. I think I mentioned it last week. We were having the issue where it was getting disabled as part of the Chrome updates. Well, good news. The Jupiter Broadcasting Chrome extension is now in the Chrome Web Store. You just have to go turn off the old one since it wasn't installed from their store, and then go add this one to your web browser. And, of course, we also have, the Firefox one. I don't know if you search for it. I don't know if it'll show up since it's not approved yet by Mozilla, but it's listed. And the links to both of those are at the bottom of jupiterbroadcasting.com. But if you would, please install those extensions, and then when you browse the sites to participate, it'll automatically tag them to contribute a portion of your shopping session to Jupiter Broadcasting, which is really how we stay on the air these days. And these will hopefully not get disabled when your web browser does an automatic update. So that's the goal there. And of course, thanks to Rikai in the chat room for working real hard on those for us. So there you have it. Alan, I think that's the whole show, yeah?
Yep.
All right, sir. Well, now TechSNAP, like I mentioned earlier in the show, is live Thursday afternoons at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is
4 p.m. Eastern, 2000 UTC.
And you can catch that at jblive.tv for the video or jblive.info for the audio streams, which is always good for those of you at your desk or on the go, maybe commuting. That's a great way to catch the show. And, of course, you can catch it for download usually a few hours after we were live over at Jupiter Broadcasting. And go check the show notes. Alan broke out, when he was talking about what Scale Engine looks for in a data center, a lot of all of that's broken out in the show notes. A lot more detail can be found there, and references and links and all of that kind of stuff, as well as HD versions, audio versions, and mobile versions of this here very show. All right, Alan, well, thanks for the great show.
Yep.
And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to this week's episode of TechSNAP. We'll see you right back here next week.